Crime and Punishment by Fyodor Dostoevsky. Part 4, Chapter 3. The fact was that up to the last moment he had never expected such an ending. He had been overbearing to the last degree, never dreaming that the two destitute and defenseless women could escape from his control. This conviction was strengthened by his vanity and conceit. A conceit to the point of fatuity. Pyotr Petrovich, who had made his way up from insignificance, was morbidly given to self-admiration, had the highest opinion of his intelligence and capacities, and sometimes even gloated in solitude over his image in the glass. But what he loved and valued above all was the money he had amassed by his labor, and by all sorts of devices. That money made him the equal of all who had been his superiors. When he had bitterly reminded Dunya that he had decided to take her in spite of evil report, Pyotr Petrovich had spoken with perfect sincerity, and had indeed felt genuinely indignant at such black ingratitude. And yet, when he made Dunya his offer, he was fully aware of the groundlessness of all the gossip. The story had been everywhere contradicted by Marfa Petrovna, and was by then disbelieved by all the townspeople, who were warm in Dunya's defense. And he would not have denied that he knew all that at the time. Yet he still thought highly of his own resolution in lifting Dunya to his level, and regarded it as something heroic. In speaking of it to Dunya, he had let out the secret feeling he cherished and admired, and he could not understand that others should fail to admire it too. He had called on Raskolnikov with the feelings of a benefactor who is about to reap the fruits of his good deeds and to hear agreeable flattery. And as he went downstairs now, he considered himself most undeservedly injured and unrecognized. Dunya was simply essential to him. To do without her was unthinkable. For many years he had voluptuous dreams of marriage, but he had gone on waiting and amassing money. He brooded with relish, in profound secret, over the image of a girl. Virtuous, poor, she must be poor, very young, very pretty, of good birth and education, very timid, one who had suffered much and was completely humbled before him, one who would all her life look on him as her savior, worship him, admire him, and only him. How many scenes, how many amorous episodes he had imagined on this seductive and playful theme when his work was over. And behold, the dream of so many years was all but realized. The beauty and education of Avdotia Romanovna had impressed him. Her helpless position had been a great allurement. In her, he had found even more than he dreamed of. Here was a girl of pride, character, virtue, of education and breeding superior to his own. He felt that. And this creature would be slavishly grateful all her life for his heroic condescension, and would humble herself in the dust before him. And he would have absolute, unbounded power over her. Not long before, he had too, after long reflection and hesitation, made an important change in his career, and was now entering on a wider circle of business. With this change, his cherished dreams of rising into a higher class of society seemed likely to be realized. He was, in fact, determined to try his fortune in Petersburg. He knew that women could do a very great deal. The fascination of a charming, virtuous, highly educated woman might make his way easier. might do wonders in attracting people to him, throwing an aureole round him. And now everything was in ruins. This horrible, sudden rupture affected him like a clap of thunder. It was like a hideous joke, an absurdity. He had only been a tiny bit masterful, had not even time to speak out, had simply made a joke, been carried away, and it had ended so seriously. And of course, too, did he love Dunya in his own way. He already possessed her in his dreams, and all at once. No, the next day, the very next day, it must all be set right, smoothed over, settled. Above all, he must crush that conceited milksop who was the cause of it all. With a sick feeling, he could not help recalling Razumihin too, but he soon reassured himself on that score, as though a fellow like that could be put on a level with him. The man he really dreaded in earnest was Svidrigailov. He had, in short, a great deal to attend to. "No, I am more to blame than anyone," said Dunya, kissing and embracing her mother. "I was tempted by his money, but on my honor, brother, I had no idea he was such a base man. If I had seen through him before, nothing would have tempted me. Don't blame me, brother." "God has delivered us, God has delivered us," Pulcheria Alexandrovna muttered, but half-consciously, as though scarcely able to realize what had happened. They were all relieved, and in 5 minutes they were laughing. Only now and then Dunya turned white and frowned, remembering what had passed. Pulcheria Alexandrovna was surprised to find that she too was glad. She had only that morning thought rupture with Lucien a terrible misfortune. Razumihin was delighted. He did not yet dare to express his joy fully, but he was in a fever of excitement, as though a ton weight had fallen off his heart. Now he had the right to devote his life to them, to serve them. Anything might happen now. But he felt afraid to think of further possibilities, and dared not let his imagination range. But Raskolnikov sat still in the same place, almost sullen and indifferent. Though he had been the most insistent on getting rid of Lucien, he seemed now the least concerned at what had happened. Dunya could not help thinking that he was still angry with her, and Pulcheria Alexandrovna watched him timidly. "What did Svidrigailov say to you?" said Dunya, approaching him. Yes, yes," cried Pulcheria Alexandrovna. Raskolnikov raised his head. "He wants to make you a present of 10,000 rubles, and he desires to see you once in my presence." "See her on no account," cried Pulcheria Alexandrovna. "And how dare he offer her money?" Then Raskolnikov repeated, rather dryly, his conversation with Svidrigailov, omitting his account of the ghostly visitations of Marfa Petrovna, wishing to avoid all unnecessary talk. "What answer did you give him?" asked Dunya. "At first I said I would not take any message to you. Then he said that he would do his utmost to obtain an interview with you without my help. He assured me that his passion for you was a passing infatuation. Now he has no feeling for you. He doesn't want you to marry Lucien. His talk was altogether rather muddled." "How do you explain him to yourself, Rochia? How did he strike you?" "I must confess I don't quite understand him. He offers you 10,000, and yet says he's not well off. He says he's going away, and in 10 minutes he forgets he has said it. Then he says he's going to be married and has already fixed on the girl. No doubt he has a motive, and probably a bad one. But it's odd that he should be so clumsy about it, if he had any designs against you. Of course, I refuse this money on your account once for all. Altogether, I thought him very strange. One might almost think he was mad. But I may be mistaken. That may only be the part he assumes. The death of Marfa Petrovna seems to have made a great impression on him.
God rest her soul, exclaimed Buteria Alexandrovna. I shall always, always pray for her. Where should we be now, Dunya, without these 3,000? It's as though it had fallen from heaven. Why, Rochia, this morning we had only 3 rubles in our pocket. And Dunya and I were just planning to pawn her watch so as to avoid borrowing from that man until he offered help.
Dunya seemed strangely impressed by Sri Dragailov's offer. She still stood, meditating.
He has got some terrible plan, she said in a half-whisper to herself, almost shuddering.
Raskolnikov noticed this disproportionate terror. I fancy I shall have to see him more than once again, he said to Dunya.
We will watch him. I will track him out,
cried Razumihin vigorously.
I won't lose sight of him. Rocha has given me leave. He said to me himself just now, take care of my sister. Will you give me leave too? Avdotia Romanovna?
Dunya smiled and held out her hand, but the look of anxiety did not leave her face. Bulgaria Alexandrovna gazed at her timidly, but the 3,000 rubles had obviously a soothing effect on her. A quarter of an hour later, they were all engaged in a lively conversation. Even Raskolnikov listened attentively for some time, though he did not talk. Razumihin was the speaker.
And why? Why should you go away?
He flowed on ecstatically.
And what are you to do in a little town? The great thing is, you are all here together. You need one another. You do need one another, believe me. For a time, anyway. Take me into partnership, and I assure you we'll plan a capital enterprise. Listen, I'll plan it all in detail to you. The whole project. It all flashed into my head this morning before anything had happened. I tell you what, I have an uncle. I must introduce you to him, a most accommodating and respectable old man. This uncle has got a capital of 1,000 rubles, and he lives on his pension and has no need of that money. For the last 2 years he has been bothering me to borrow it from him and pay him 6% interest. I know what that means. He simply wants to help me. Last year I had no need of it, but this year I resolved to borrow it as soon as he arrived. Then you lend me another 1,000 of your 3, and we have enough for a start, and we'll go into partnership. And what are we going to do?
Then Razumihin began to unfold his project, and he explained at length that almost all our publishers and booksellers know nothing at all of what they are selling, and for that reason they are usually bad publishers, and that any decent publications pay as a rule and give it a profit, sometimes a considerable one. Razumihin had indeed been dreaming of setting up as a publisher. For the last 2 years he had been working in publishers' offices and knew 3 European languages well, though he had told Raskolnikov 6 days before that he was Swatch in German, with an object of persuading him to take half his translation and half the payment for it. He had told a lie then, and Raskolnikov knew he was lying. Why should we let our chance slip when we have one of the chief means of success, money of our own? Cried Razumihin warmly. Of course, there will be a lot of work, but we will work. You, Avdotia Romanovna, I, Rodion. You get a splendid profit on some books nowadays. And the great point of the business is that we shall know just what
wants translating, and we shall be translating, publishing, learning all at once. I can be of use because I have experience. For nearly 2 years I have been scuttling about among the publishers, and now I know every detail of their business. You need not be a saint to make pots, believe me. And why? Why should we let our chance slip? Why, I know, and I kept the secret 2 or 3 books, which one might get 100 rubles simply for thinking of translating and publishing. Indeed, and I would not take 500 for the very idea of one of them. And what do you think? If I were to tell a publisher, I dare say he'd hesitate. They are such blockheads. And as for the business side, printing, paper, selling, you trust to me. I know my way about. We'll begin in a small way and go on to a large. In any case, it will get us our living, and we shall get back our capital. Dunia's eyes shone. I like what you're saying, Dmitri Prokofitch, she said. I know nothing about it, of course, put in Pulcheria Alexandrovna. It may be a good deal, but again, God knows it's new and untried. Of course, we must remain here at least for a time. She looked at Rochia. What do you think, brother? Said Dunya. I think it's a very good idea, he answered. Of course, it's too soon to dream of a publishing firm, but we certainly might bring out 5 or 6 books, and be sure of success. I know of one book myself, which would be sure to go well. And as for his being able to manage it, there's no doubt about that either. He knows the business. But we can talk it over later. Hurrah! Cried Razumihin. Now, stay. There's a flat here in this house belonging to the same owner. It's a special flat apart, not communicating with these lodgings. It's furnished, rent moderate, 3 rooms. Suppose you take them to begin with. I'll pawn your watch tomorrow and bring you the money, and everything can be arranged then. You can all 3 live together, and Rochia will be with you. But where are you off to, Rochia? What, Rochia? Are you going already? Pulcheria Alexandrovna asked in dismay. At such a minute? Cried Razumihin. Dunya looked at her brother with incredulous wonder. He held his cap in his hand. He was preparing to leave them. One would think you were burying me or saying goodbye forever, he said somewhat oddly. He attempted to smile, but he did not turn out a smile. But who knows, perhaps it is the last time we shall see each other. He let slip accidentally. It was what he was thinking, and it somehow was uttered aloud. What is the matter with you? Cried his mother. Where are you going, Rochia? Asked Dunya, rather strangely. Oh, I'm quite obliged to, he answered vaguely, as though hesitating what he would say. But there was a look of sharp determination in his white face. I meant to say, as I was coming here, I meant to tell you, Mother, and you, Dunya, that it would be better for us to part for a time. I feel ill. I am not at peace. I will come afterwards. I will come of myself when it's possible. I remember you and love you. Leave me alone. I decided this even before. I'm absolutely resolved on it. Whatever may come to me, whether I come to ruin or not, I want to be alone. Forget me altogether. It's better. Don't inquire about me. When I can, I'll come of myself, or I'll send for you. Perhaps it will all come back, but now, if you love me, give me up. Else I shall begin to hate you. I feel it. Goodbye. Good God! Cried Pulcheria Alexandrovna, but his mother and his sister were terribly alarmed. Razumihin was also. Rochia, be reconciled with us. Let us be as before.
cried his poor mother. He turned slowly to the door and slowly went out of the room. Dunya overtook him. "Brother, what are you doing to Mother?" she whispered, her eyes flashing with indignation. He looked dully at her.
"No matter, I shall come, I'm coming," he muttered in an undertone as though not fully conscious of what he was saying, and he went out of the room.
"Wicked, heartless egoist!" cried Dunya.
"He is insane, not heartless. He is mad. Don't you see it? You're heartless after that."
Rasumihin whispered in her ear, squeezing her hand tightly. "I shall be back directly," he shouted to the horror-stricken mother, and he ran out of the room. Raskolnikov was waiting for him at the end of the passage.
"I knew you would run after me," he said. "Go back to them. Be with them tomorrow and always. Perhaps I shall come, if I can. Goodbye."
And without holding out his hand, he walked away.
"But where are you going? What are you doing? What's the matter with you? How can you go on like this?"
Rasumihin muttered, at his wits' end. Raskolnikov stopped once more.
"Once and for all, never ask me about anything. I have nothing to tell you. Don't come to see me. Maybe I'll come tomorrow. Leave me, but don't leave them. Do you understand me?"
It was dark in the corridor. They were standing near the lamp. For a minute, they were looking at one another in silence. Rasumihin remembered that minute all his life. Raskolnikov's burning and intent eyes grew more penetrating every moment, piercing into his soul, into his consciousness. Suddenly, Rasumihin started. Something strange, as it were, passed between them. Some idea, some hint, as it were, slipped. Something awful, hideous, and suddenly understood on both sides. Rasumihin turned pale.
"Do you understand now?"
said Raskolnikov, his face twitching nervously. Go back to them," he said suddenly, and turning quickly, he went out of the house. I will not attempt to describe how Rasumihin went back to the ladies, how he soothed them, how he protested that Rochia needed rest in his illness, protested that Rochia was sure to come, that he would come every day, that he was very, very much upset, that he must not be irritated, that he, Rasumihin, would watch over him, would get him a doctor, the best doctor, a consultation. In fact, from that evening, Rasumihin took his place with them as a son and a brother. Chapter 4. Raskolnikov went straight to the house on the canal bank where Sonia lived. It was an old green house of 3 stories. He found the porter and obtained from him vague direction as to the whereabouts of Kapernaumov, the tailor. Having found in the corner of the courtyard the entrance to the dark and narrow staircase, he mounted to the 2nd floor and came out into a gallery that ran round the whole 2nd story over the yard. While he was wandering in the darkness, uncertain where to turn for Kapernaumov's door, a door opened 3 paces from him. He mechanically took hold of it. "Who is there?" a woman's voice asked uneasily. "It's I. Come to see you," answered Raskolnikov, and he walked into the tiny entry. On a broken chair stood a candle in a battered copper candlestick. "It's you! Good heavens!" cried Sonia weakly, and she stood rooted to the spot.
Which is your room? This way?
And Raskolnikov, trying not to look at her, hastened in. A minute later, Sonia too came in with the candle, set down the candlestick, and completely disconcerted, stood before him inexpressibly agitated and apparently frightened by his unexpected visit. The color rushed suddenly to her pale face, and tears came into her eyes. She felt sick and ashamed, and happy too. Raskolnikov turned away quickly and sat on a chair by the table. He scanned the room in a rapid glance. It was a large but exceedingly low-pitched room, the only one let by the Kapernaumovs, to whose rooms a closed door led in the wall on the left. In the opposite side of the right-hand wall was another door, always kept locked. That led to the next flat, which formed a separate lodging. Sonia's room looked like a barn. It was a very irregular quadrangle, and this gave it a grotesque appearance. A wall with 3 windows looking out onto the canal ran aslant, so that one corner formed a very acute angle, and it was difficult to see in it without very strong light. The other corner was disproportionately obtuse. There was scarcely any furniture in the big room. In the corner on the right was a bedstead. Beside it, nearest the door, a chair. A plain deal table covered by blue cloth stood against the same wall, close to the door into the other flat. 2 rush-bottom chairs stood by the table. On the opposite wall, near the acute angle, stood a small, plain, wooden chest of drawers, looking, as it were, lost in a desert. That was all there was in the room. The yellow, scratched, and shabby wallpaper was black in the corners. It must have been damp and full of fumes in the winter. There was every sign of poverty. Even the bedstead had no. Sonia looked in silence at her visitor, who was so attentively and unceremoniously scrutinizing her room, and even began at last to tremble with terror, as though she was standing before her judge and the arbiter of her destinies.
I am late. It's 11, isn't it?
He asked, still not lifting his eyes. Yes, muttered Sonia. Oh, yes, it is, she added hastily, as though in that lay her means of escape. My landlady's clock has just struck. I heard it myself.
I've come to you for the last time,
Raskolnikov went on gloomily, although this was the first time. I may perhaps not see you again. Are you going away?
I don't know.
Tomorrow. Then you're not coming to Katerina Ivanovna tomorrow? Sonia's voice shook.
I don't know. I shall know tomorrow morning. Never mind that. I've come to say one word.
He raised his brooding eyes to her, and suddenly noticed that he was sitting down, while she was all the while standing before him.
Why are you standing? Sit down,
he said, in a changed voice, gentle and friendly. She sat down. He looked kindly and almost compassionately at her.
How thin you are. What a hand. Quite transparent, like a dead hand.
He took her hand. Sonia smiled faintly. I have always been like that, she said.
Even when you lived at home?
Yes.
Of course you were, he added abruptly, and the expression of his face and the sound of his voice changed again, suddenly. He looked round him once more. You rent this room from the Kapernaumovs?
Yes.
They live there, through that door?
Yes. They have another room like this.
All in one room?
Yes.
I should be afraid in your room at night.
he observed gloomily.
They are very good people, very kind, answered Sonia, who still seemed bewildered. And all the furniture, everything is theirs. And they are very kind, and the children, too, often come to see me.
They all stammer, don't they?
Yes, he stammers, and he's lame, and his wife, too. It's not exactly that she stammers, but she can't speak plainly. She is a very kind woman, and he used to be her house serf. And there are 7 children, and it's only the eldest one that stammers, and the others are simply ill. But they don't stammer. But where did you hear about them? She added with some surprise.
Your father told me. Then he told me all about you, and how you went out at 6 o'clock and came back at 9, and how Katerina Ivanovna knelt down by your bed.
Sonia was confused. I fancied I saw him today, she whispered, hesitatingly.
Whom?
Father. I was walking in the street, out there, at the corner, about 10 o'clock, and he seemed to be walking in front. It looked just like him. I wanted to go to Katerina Ivanovna.
You were walking in the streets?
Yes, Sonia whispered abruptly, again overcome with confusion and looking down.
Katerina Ivanovna used to beat you, I dare say.
Oh, no. What are you saying? No. Sonia looked at him almost with dismay.
You love her, then?
Love her, of course, said Sonia with plaintive emphasis, and she clasped her hands in distress. Ah, you don't. If only you knew. You see, she is quite like a child. Her mind is quite unhinged, you see, from sorrow. And how clever she used to be, how generous, how kind. Ah, you don't understand, you don't understand. Sonia said this as though in despair, wringing her hands in excitement and distress. Her pale cheeks flushed. There was a look of anguish in her eyes. It was clear that she was stirred to the very depths, that she was longing to speak, to champion, to express something, a sort of insatiable compassion, if one may so express it, was reflected in every feature of her face. Beat me? How can you? Good heavens, beat me? And if she did beat me, what then? What of it? No, nothing about it. She is so unhappy, oh, how unhappy, and ill. She is seeking righteousness. She is pure. She has such faith, and there must be righteousness everywhere, and she expects it. And if you were to torture her, she wouldn't do wrong. She doesn't see that it's impossible for people to be righteous, and she is angry at it. Like a child, like a child. She is good.
And what will happen to you?
Sonia looked at him inquiringly.
They are left on your hands, you see. They were all on your hands before, though, and your father came to you to beg for drink. Well, how will it be now?
I don't know, Sonia articulated mournfully.
Will they stay there?
I don't know. They are in debt for the lodging, but the landlady, I hear, said today that she wanted to get rid of them, and Katerina Ivanovna says that she won't stay another minute.
How is it she is so bold? She relies upon you?
Oh, no, don't talk like that. We are one. We live like one. Sonia was agitated again, and even angry, as though a canary or some other little bird were to be angry. And what could she do? What could she do? She persisted, getting hot and excited. And how she cried today. Her mind is unhinged. Haven't you noticed it? At one minute she's worrying like a child that everything should be right tomorrow, the lunch and all that. Then she is wringing her hands, spitting blood, weeping, and all at once she will begin knocking her head against the wall, in despair. Then she will be comforted again. She builds all her hopes on you. She says that you will help her now and that she will borrow a little money somewhere and go to her native town with me and set up a boarding school for the daughters of gentlemen and take me to superintend it. And we will begin a splendid new life. And she kisses and hugs me, comforts me. And you know she has such faith in her fancies. One can't contradict her. And all the day long she has been washing, cleaning, mending. She dragged the washtub into the room with her feeble hands and sank on the bed, gasping for breath. We went this morning to the shops to buy shoes for Pelenka and Lida, for theirs are quite worn out. Only the money we reckoned wasn't enough, not nearly enough. And she picked out such dear little boots, for she has taste you don't know. And there, in the shop, she burst out crying before the shopman because she hadn't enough. It was sad to see her.
Well, after that I can understand your living like this, Raskolnikov said, with a bitter smile.
And aren't you sorry for them? Aren't you sorry?
Sonia flew at him again.
Why, I know you gave your last penny yourself, though you'd seen nothing of it, and if you'd seen everything, oh dear, and how often I've brought her to tears. Only last week, yes, only a week before his death, I was cruel, and how often I've done it. I've been wretched at the thought of it all day.
Sonia wrung her hands as she spoke at the pain of remembering it. You were cruel?
Yes, I went to see them, she went on, weeping. And Father said, read me something, Sonia, my head aches. Read to me. Here's a book. He had a book he had got from Andrei Semenovich Lebeziatnikov. He lives there. He always used to get hold of such funny books. And I said, I can't stay, as I didn't want to read. And I'd gone in chiefly to show Katarina Ivanovna some collars. Lizaveta, the peddler, sold me some collars and cuffs. Cheap, pretty, new embroidered ones. Katarina Ivanovna liked them very much. She put them on and looked at herself in the glass and was delighted with them. Make me a present of them, Sonia, she said. Please do, she said. She wanted them so much. And when could she wear them? They just reminded her of her old happy days. She looked at herself in the glass, admired herself, and she has no clothes at all, no things of her own, hasn't had all these years, and she never asks anyone for anything. She is proud. She'd sooner give away everything. And these she asked for. She liked them so much. And I was sorry to give them. What use are they to you, Katarina Ivanovna? I said. I spoke like that to her. I ought not to have said that. She gave me such a look, and she was so grieved at my refusing her. And it was so sad to see. And she was not grieved for the collars, but for my refusing. I saw that. Oh, if I could only bring it all back, change it, take back those words. Oh, but it's nothing to you.
Did you know Lizaveta, the peddler?
Yes. Did you know her?
Sonia asked with some surprise. Katarina Ivanovna is in consumption, rapid consumption. She will die soon, said Raskolnikov after a pause, without answering her question.
Oh, no.
And Sonia unconsciously clutched both her hands, as though imploring that she should not. But it will be better if she does die.
No, not better. Not at all better.
Sonia unconsciously repeated in dismay. And the children? What can you do except take them to live with you?
No, I don't know, cried Sonia, almost in despair, and she put her hands to her head. It was evident that the idea had very often occurred to her before, and he had only roused it again.
And what, if even now, while Katarina Ivanovna is alive, you get ill and are taken to the hospital? What will happen then?
He persisted, pitilessly.
How can you? That cannot be. And Sonia's face worked with awful terror.
Cannot be.
Raskolnikov went on with a harsh smile.
You are not insured against it, are you? What will happen to them then? They will be in the street, all of them. She will cough and beg and knock her head against some wall as she did today. And the children will cry. Then she will fall down, be taken to the police station and to the hospital. She will die, and the children...
Oh, no, God will not let it be, broke at last from Sonia's overburdened bosom. She listened, looking imploringly at him, clasping her hands in dumb entreaty, as though it all depended upon him. Raskolnikov got up and began to walk around the room. A minute passed. Sonia was standing with her hands and her head hanging in terrible dejection.
And can't you save? Put by for a rainy day?
He asked, stopping suddenly before her. No, whispered Sonia.
Of course not. Have you tried?
He asked, almost ironically. Yes.
And it didn't come off? Of course not. No need to ask.
And again he paced the room. Another minute passed.
You don't get money every day.
Sonia was more confused than ever, and color rushed into her face again. No, she whispered with a painful effort.
It will be the same with Polenka, no doubt, he said suddenly.
No, no, it can't be. No, Sonia cried out in desperation as though she had been stabbed. God would not allow anything so awful.
He lets others come to it.
No, no, God will protect her. God, she repeated beside herself.
But perhaps there is no God at all.
Raskolnikov answered with a sort of malignance, laughed and looked at her. Sonia's face suddenly changed. A tremor passed over it. She looked at him with unutterable reproach, tried to say something but could not speak, and broke into bitter, bitter sobs, hiding her face in her hands.
You say Katerina Ivanovna's mind is unhinged. Your own mind is unhinged,
he said after a brief silence. 5 minutes passed. He still paced up and down the room in silence, not looking at her. At last he went up to her, his eyes glittering. He put his 2 hands on her shoulders and looked straight into her tearful face. His eyes were hard, feverish, and piercing. His lips were twitching. All at once, he bent down quickly and, dropping to the ground, kissed her foot. Sonia drew back from him, as from a madman, and certainly he looked like a madman. What are you doing to me? She muttered, turning pale, and a sudden anguish clutched at her heart. He stood up at once.
I did not bow down to you. I bowed down to all the suffering of humanity,
he said wildly, and walked away to the window.
Listen,
he added, turning to her a minute later.
I said just now to an insolent man that he was not worth your little finger, and that I did my sister honor making her sit beside you.
You said that to them? And in her presence, cried Sonia, frightened. Sit down with me in honor. Why, I'm dishonorable. Oh, why did you say that?
It was not because of your dishonor and your sin I said that of you, but because of your great suffering. But you are a great sinner. That's true, he added almost solemnly. And your worst sin is that you have destroyed and betrayed yourself for nothing. Isn't that fearful?
Isn't it fearful that you are living in this filth which you loathe so, and at the same time you know yourself, you've only to open your eyes, that you're not helping anyone by it, not saving anyone from anything? Tell me, he went on, almost in a frenzy, how this shame and degradation can exist in you side by side with other opposite holy feelings. It would be better, 1,000 times better and wiser, to leap into the water and end it all. But what would become of them? Sonia asked, faintly, gazing at him with eyes of anguish, but not seeming surprised at his suggestion. Raskolnikov looked strangely at her. He read it all in her face, so she must have had that thought already, perhaps many times, and earnestly she had thought out in her despair how to end it, and so earnestly that now she scarcely wondered at his suggestion. She had not even noticed the cruelty of his words, the significance of his reproaches, and his peculiar attitude to her shame she had, of course, not noticed either, and that, too, was clear to him. But he saw how monstrously the thought of her disgraceful, shameful position was torturing her, and had long tortured her. What, he thought, could hitherto have hindered her from putting an end to it? Only then he realized what those poor little orphan children, and that pitiful, half-crazy Katerina Ivanovna knocking her head against the wall in her consumption, meant for Sonia. But nevertheless, it was clear to him again that with her character and the amount of education she had received, after all, she could not in any case remain so. He was still confronted by the question, how could she have remained so long in that position without going out of her mind, since she could not bring herself to jump into the water? Of course, he knew that Sonia's position was an exceptional case, though unhappily not unique and not infrequent, indeed. But that very exceptionalness, her tinge of education, her previous life might, one would have thought, have killed her at the first step on that revolting path. What held her up? Surely not depravity. All that infamy had obviously only touched her mechanically. Not one drop of real depravity had penetrated to her heart. He saw that. He saw through her as she stood before him. There are 3 ways before her, he thought: the canal, the madhouse, or, at last, to sink into depravity, which obscures the mind and turns the heart to stone. The last idea was the most revolting, but he was a skeptic. He was young, abstract, and therefore cruel, and so he could not help believing that the last end was the most likely. But can that be true? He cried to himself. Can that creature who has still preserved the purity of her spirit be consciously drawn at last into that sink of filth and iniquity? Can the process already have begun? Can it be that she has only been able to bear it till now, because vice has begun to be less loathsome to her? No, that cannot be, he cried, as Sonia had just before. No, what has kept her from the canal till now is the idea of sin, and they, the children. And if she has not gone out of her mind, but who says she's not gone out of her mind? Is she in her senses? Can one talk? Can one reason as she does? How can she sit on the edge of the abyss of loathsomeness into which she is slipping and refuse to listen when she is told of danger? Does she expect a miracle? No doubt she does. Doesn't that all mean madness? He stayed obstinately at that thought. He liked that explanation indeed better than any other. He began looking more intently at her. So, you pray to God a good deal, Sonia? He asked her. Sonia did not speak. He stood beside her, waiting for an answer. What would I be without God? She she whispered rapidly, forcibly, glancing at him with suddenly flashing eyes and squeezing his hand.
Ah, so that is it, he thought. And what does God do for you?
He asked, probing her further. Sonia was silent a long while, as though she could not answer. Her weak chest kept heaving with emotion.
Be silent! Don't ask! You don't deserve...
she cried suddenly, looking sternly and wrathfully at him.
That's it, he repeated to himself.
He does everything, she whispered quickly, looking down again.
That's the way out. That's the explanation, he decided,
scrutinizing her with eager curiosity. With a new, strange, almost morbid feeling, he gazed at that pale, thin, irregular, angular little face. Those soft blue eyes which could flash with such fire, such stern energy. That little body still shaking with indignation and anger. And it all seemed to him more and more strange, almost impossible.
She's a religious maniac,
he repeated to himself. There was a book lying on the chest of drawers. He had noticed it every time he paced up and down the room. Now he took it up and looked at it. It was the New Testament in the Russian translation. It was bound in leather, old and worn.
Where did you get that?
He called to her across the room. She was still standing in the same place, 3 steps from the table. It was brought me, she answered, as it were unwillingly, not looking at him.
Who brought it?
Lizaveta. I asked her for it.
Lizaveta?
Strange, he thought. Everything about Sonia seemed to him stranger and more wonderful every moment. He carried the book to the candle and began to turn over the pages.
Where's the story of Lazarus? He asked suddenly.
Sonia looked obstinately at the ground and would not answer. She was standing sideways to the table.
Where's the raising of Lazarus? Find it for me, Sonia.
She stole a glance at him. You are not looking in the right place. It's in the 4th Gospel, she whispered sternly, without looking at him.
Find it and read it to me, he said.
He sat down with his elbow on the table, leaned his head on his hand, and looked away sullenly, prepared to listen.
In 3 weeks' time they'll welcome me in the madhouse. I shall be there if I am not in a worse place,
he muttered to himself. Sonia heard Raskolnikov's request distrustfully and moved hesitatingly to the table. She took the book, however. Haven't you read it? She asked, looking up at him across the table. Her voice became sterner and sterner.
Long ago, when I was at school. Read.
And you haven't heard it in church?
I haven't been. Do you go often?
No, whispered Sonia. Raskolnikov smiled.
I understand. And you won't go to your father's funeral tomorrow?
Yes, I shall. I was at church last week, too. I had a requiem service.
For whom?
For Lizaveta. She was killed with an axe. His nerves were more and more strained. His head began to go round.
Were you friends with Lizaveta?
Yes, she was good. She used to come. Not often, she couldn't. We used to read together and talk. She will see God. The last phrase sounded strange in his ears. And here was something new again. The mysterious meetings with Lizaveta, and both of them religious maniacs.
I shall be a religious maniac myself soon. It's infectious. Read,
he cried irritably and insistently. Sonia still hesitated. Her heart was throbbing. She hardly dared to read to him. He looked almost with exasperation at the unhappy lunatic. "What for? You don't believe?" she whispered softly, and, as it were, breathlessly.
"Read. I want you to," he persisted. "You used to read to Lizaveta."
Sonia opened the book and found the place. Her hands were shaking. Her voice failed her. Twice she tried to begin and could not bring out the first syllable. "Now, a certain man was sick named Lazarus of Bethany." She forced herself at last to read, but at the third word her voice broke like an overstrained string. There was a catch in her breath. Raskolnikov saw in part why Sonia could not bring herself to read to him, and the more he saw this, the more roughly and irritably he insisted on her doing so. He understood only too well how painful it was for her to betray and unveil all that was her own. He understood that these feelings really were her secret treasure, which she had kept, perhaps for years, perhaps from childhood, while she lived with an unhappy father and a distracted stepmother crazed by grief, in the midst of starving children and unseemly abuse and reproaches. But at the same time, he knew now, and knew for certain that, although it filled her with dread and suffering, yet she had a tormenting desire to read, and to read to him, that he might hear it, and to read now, whatever might come of it. He read this in her eyes. He could see it in her intense emotion. She mastered herself, controlled the spasm in her throat, and went on reading the 11th chapter of St. John. She went on to the 19th verse. "And many of the Jews came to Martha and Mary to comfort them concerning their brother. Then Mary, as soon as she heard that Jesus was coming, went and met him. But Mary sat still in the house. Then said Martha unto Jesus, Lord, if thou hadst been here, my brother had not died. But I know that even now, whatsoever thou wilt ask of God, God will give it thee." Then she stopped again with a shamefaced feeling that her voice would quiver and break again. "Jesus said unto her, Thy brother shall rise again. Martha said unto him, I know that he shall rise again in the resurrection at the last day. Jesus said unto her, I am the resurrection and the life. He that believeth in me, though he were dead, yet shall he live. And whosoever liveth and believeth in me shall never die. Believest thou this? And she saith unto him," and drawing a painful breath, Sonia read distinctly and forcibly, as though she were making a public confession of faith. "Yea, Lord, I believe that thou art the Christ, the Son of God, which should come into the world." She stopped and looked up quickly at him, but controlling herself, went on reading. Raskolnikov sat without moving, his elbows on the table, and his eyes turned away. She read to the 32nd verse. "Then, when Mary was come where Jesus was, and saw him, she fell down at his feet, saying unto him, Lord, if thou hadst been here, my brother had not died. When Jesus therefore saw her weeping, and the Jews also weeping which came with her, he groaned in the spirit and was troubled, and said, Where have ye laid him? They said unto him, Lord, come and see. Jesus wept. Then said the Jews, Behold, how he loved him. And some of them said, Could not this man which opened the eyes of the blind have caused that even this man should not have died?" Raskolnikov turned and looked at her with emotion. Yes, he had known it. She was trembling in a real physical fever. He had expected it. She was getting near the story of the greatest miracle, and a feeling of immense triumph came over her. Her voice rang out like a bell. Triumph and joy gave it power. The lines danced before her eyes, but she knew that she was reading by heart. And the last verse, could not this man which opened the eyes of the blind? Dropping her voice, she passionately reproduced the doubt, the reproach, and the censure of the blind, disbelieving Jews, who in another moment would fall at his feet as though struck by thunder, sobbing and believing. And he too is blinded and unbelieving. He too will hear. He too will believe. Yes, yes, at once, now. Was what she was dreaming, and she was quivering with happy anticipation. Jesus, therefore, groaning in himself, cometh to the grave. It was a cave, and a stone lay upon it. Jesus said, Take ye away the stone, Martha. The sister of him that was dead saith unto him, Lord, by this time he stinketh, for he hath been dead 4 days. She laid emphasis on the word 4. Jesus saith unto her, Said I not unto thee that if thou wouldst believe, thou shouldst see the glory of God? Then they took away the stone from the place where the dead was laid. And Jesus lifted up his eyes and said, Father, I thank thee that thou hast heard me. And I knew that thou hearest me always, but because of the people which stand by I said it, that they may believe that thou hast sent me. And when he thus had spoken, he cried with a loud voice, Lazarus, come forth. And he that was dead came forth. She read loudly, cold and trembling with ecstasy, as though she were seeing it before her eyes. Bound hand and foot with grave clothes, and his face was bound about with a napkin. Jesus saith unto them, Loose him, and let him go. Then many of the Jews which came to Mary, and had seen the things which Jesus did, believed on him. She could read no more, closed the book, and got up from her chair quickly. That is all about the raising of Lazarus, she whispered severely and abruptly, and turning away she stood motionless, not daring to raise her eyes to him. She still trembled feverishly. The candle end was flickering out in the battered candlestick, dimly lighting up the poverty-stricken room, the murderer, and the harlot, who had so strangely been reading together the eternal book. 5 minutes or more passed. I came to speak of something, Raskolnikov said aloud, frowning. He got up and went to Sonia. She lifted her eyes to him in silence. His face was particularly stern, and there was a sort of savage determination in it. I have abandoned my family today, he said. My mother and sister. I am not going to see them. I've broken with them completely. What for? Asked Sonia, amazed. Her recent meeting with his mother and sister had left a great impression which she could not analyze. She heard his news almost with horror. I have only you now, he added. Let us go together. I've come to you. We are both accursed. Let us go our way together. His eyes glittered as though he were mad, Sonia thought, in her turn. Go where? She asked in alarm, and involuntarily stepped back. How do I know? I only know it's the same road. I know that and nothing more. It's the same goal. She looked at him and understood nothing. She knew only that he was terribly, infinitely unhappy. No one of them will understand if you tell them, but I have understood. I need you. That is why I've come to you. I don't understand, whispered Sonia. You'll understand later. Haven't you done the same? You too have transgressed, have had the strength to transgress. You have laid hands on yourself. You have destroyed a life, your own. It's all the same. You might have lived in spirit and understanding, but you'll end in the Haymarket. But you won't be able to stand it. And if you remain alone, you'll go out of your mind like me. You are like a mad creature already. So we must go together, on the same road. Let us go.
What for? What's all this for? Said Sonia, strangely and violently agitated by his words.
What for? Because you can't remain like this, that's why. You must look things straight in the face at last and not weep like a child and cry that God won't allow it. What will happen if you should really be taken to the hospital tomorrow? She is mad and in consumption. She'll soon die. And the children. Do you mean to tell me Polenka won't come to grief? Haven't you seen children here at the street corners sent out by their mothers to beg? I found out where those mothers live and in what surroundings. Children can't remain children there. At 7, the child is vicious and a thief. Yet, children, you know, are the image of Christ. Theirs is the kingdom of heaven. He bade us honor and love them. They are the humanity of the future.
What's to be done? What's to be done? Repeated Sonia, weeping hysterically and wringing her hands.
What's to be done? Break what must be broken once and for all, that's all, and take the suffering on oneself. What?
You don't understand?
You'll understand later. Freedom and power, and above all, power. Over all trembling creation and all the ant-heap. That's the goal. Remember that. That's my farewell message. Perhaps it's the last time I shall speak to you. If I don't come tomorrow, you'll hear of it all, and then remember these words. And someday later on, in years to come, you'll understand, perhaps, what they meant. If I come tomorrow, I'll tell you who killed Lizaveta. Goodbye.
Sonia started with terror. Why, do you know who killed her? She asked, chilled with horror, looking wildly at him.
I know, and will tell you. You, only you. I have chosen you out. I'm not coming to you to ask forgiveness, but simply to tell you. I chose you out long ago to hear this, when your father talked of you, and when Lizaveta was alive, I thought of it. Goodbye. Don't shake hands. Tomorrow.
He went out. Sonia gazed at him as at a madman. But she herself was like one insane, and felt it. Her head was going round. Good heavens! How does he know who killed Lizaveta? What did those words mean? It's awful. But at the same time, the idea did not enter her head. Not for a moment. Oh, he must be terribly unhappy. He has abandoned his mother and sister. What for? What has happened? And what had he in his mind? What did he say to her? He had kissed her foot and said, yes, he had said it clearly, that he could not live without her. Oh, merciful heavens! Sonia spent the whole night feverish and delirious. She jumped from time to time, wept, and wrung her hands, then sank again into feverish sleep, and dreamt of Polenka, Katarina Ivanovna, and Lizaveta, of reading the gospel, and him, with pale face, with burning eyes, kissing her feet, weeping. On the other side of the door, on the right, which divided Sonia's room from Madame Reslick's flat, was a room which had long stood empty. A card was fixed on the gate, and a notice stuck in the windows over the canal, advertising it to let. Sonia had long been accustomed to the rooms being uninhabited. But all that time, Mr. Svidrigailov had been standing, listening, at the door of the empty room. When Raskolnikov went out, he stood still, thought a moment,
went on tiptoe to his own room, which adjoined the empty one, brought a chair, and noiselessly carried it to the door that led to Sonia's room. The conversation had struck him as interesting and remarkable, and he had greatly enjoyed it, so much so that he brought a chair that he might not, in the future, tomorrow, for instance, have to endure the inconvenience of standing a whole hour, but might listen in comfort.